Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. Westerville, Ohio, May 25th, 2020, just after 9 a.m. Patrol units arrive within minutes to a quiet condominium near County Line Road. Inside, officers document what should have left with a person who chose to leave. Phone, keys, wallet, and car, all present. The person missing is Emily Noble, 52. The report comes from her husband, Matt Moore, who tells police he woke to find her gone. Body-worn cameras capture a methodical pass through the entry, living area, and garage. Nothing looks smashed or ransacked. No forced entry is obvious in this first sweep. An officer calls for a neighborhood canvass and requests any doorbell or exterior cameras. The clock matters, so the clock is written down. Call receipt, unit arrival, perimeter set, initial interviews. According to contemporaneous records, investigators also note a digital detail they'll return to again: no outgoing activity from Emily's device after the evening of May 24th, a negative evidence window that narrows when something could have happened. Canvas teams work the cul-de-sac and the footpaths that thread behind the condos toward the wooded strip. Residents recall nothing unusual overnight. A supervisor directs a grid search along the nearest trailheads while another officer confirms the car is still in the garage. If she's walking, one search lead says on camera, she left without essentials. That fact, not speculation, guides the next steps. Call the hospitals, ping for recent admissions, check local transit, and log any Jane Doe reports within a reasonable radius. Back inside the condo, the initial inventory is simple and clinical: what's here, what's not, and what bears documenting for later comparison. Photographs lock the status of the front door, windows, and the garage layout. Each item is tagged as preliminary until a scene tech can return with a full kit. The objective is to preserve options. You can't unmove something you moved too soon. By midday, the command post requests any nearby municipal or private cameras that might show pedestrian movement early May 25th. Officers note routes that funnel from the residence to the woods and out to arterials. If Emily left on foot, available angles are limited. If she left by vehicle, the car at home says it wasn't hers. The question for viewers, and for investigators, is direct. What explains a disappearance with essentials left behind and a phone that goes quiet the evening before? As the first shift turns over, a detective logs the anchor times the team will keep returning to. Last known personal contact on May 24th, the device dark interval later that night, and the missing report May 25th, just after 9 a.m. No assumptions about struggle or voluntary departure appear in the paperwork. The language stays neutral, but the stakes are clear. In cases like this, time is the only thing that won't cooperate. You can't get more of it, only better use of what you have. With the first hours preserved on paper and camera, the investigation splits. The residence remains a question. The wooded strip nearby may hold answers, and the intake will turn recovery into record. Intake turns unanswered questions into measurable records. At the coroner's facility, procedure, not conjecture, leads. The remains are received under sealed custody, logged against the originating agency, the date, and the property receipt number. Each container is photographed in place, seals inspected, then broken with a witness present. Chain of custody entries identify who handled what, when, and why. That log will matter later. Any gap becomes a point of attack in court. Inventory begins with condition. What is present, what is absent, and what is attached are recorded before a single item is moved. Clothing remnants, if any, are dried and packaged separately. Soil and botanical material are preserved. Personal effects are listed, photographed, and boxed. The USB cord observed at the neck is documented in situ, measured, its position mapped relative to anatomical landmarks, then removed by a pathologist with a tech recording distances and orientation. The cord is secured as a discrete exhibit, labeled for potential trace, DNA, and tool mark comparison. All actions are noted as preliminary until confirmatory testing is completed. Photography proceeds in a fixed order: overall, mid-range, then close-ups, front and posterior. Markers indicate prior recovery ties, knots, or impressions. A scale sits in every frame. Any ligature furrow, abrasion, or indentation is captured before cleaning. In skeletal regions where soft tissue is limited, the team documents cortical integrity, fracture lines, and any remodeling that could predate the event. Each observation is logged with neutral language: noted, present, absent. avoiding interpretation until analysis is complete. The external exam distinguishes peri-mortem changes from post-mortem artifact. In wooded recoveries, animal activity, insect scoring, and environmental wear can mimic injury. That is why notes are tight. Location, dimension, edge character, associated tissue response. And if a mark lacks hemorrhagic response, it may indicate post-mortem change. If underlying bone shows sharp force or blunt force characteristics, the pathologist records it for later consultation with a forensic anthropologist. These entries are tagged working, subject to revision once lab results return or experts confer. Radiography follows. Whole body X-rays check for projectiles, occult fractures, or foreign bodies. If imaging shows fractures in the hyoid or thyroid cartilage, that becomes a prompt for closer neck dissection findings. If skeletal weathering complicates that view, notes reflect the limitation. Again, working until confirmed. The internal exam is methodical. Neck structures are dissected en bloc when indicated, with samples retained for histology. If soft tissue is insufficient, anthropological methods take primacy. Macroscopic inspection under magnification, documentation of fracture morphology, and, if needed, 3D surface capture. Toxicology tubes, blood if available, alternative matrices if not, are drawn from preserved fluids or skeletal extraction when feasible. Each sample is barcoded, sealed, and sent under documented chain to the toxicology lab. Expected turnaround times are recorded, and the case status is updated depending analysis. Reporting separates observation from opinion. One section lists objective findings: ligature present on receipt, position described, skeletal elements with noted changes, any radiographic anomalies. Another section states preliminary opinions. For example, injuries of the head and neck documented, significance under review. The final opinion, cause and manner, remains undetermined until all testing and consultations conclude, or where evidence conflicts until the office decides whether the available facts meet the threshold for a definitive statement. In contested cases, the language is purposely careful. Conclusions must survive cross-examination. Evidence routing is audited. The cord is released to the crime lab for fiber, DNA, and potential tool mark analysis. Any hair-like material is lifted with clean forceps and stored in paper bundles. Swabs are taken from surfaces with plausible transfer and sent for serology and DNA screening, recognizing that environmental exposure can degrade profiles. If insect samples were retained at recovery, an entomologist may be consulted to bracket a post-mortem interval. If conditions make that unreliable, the report states the limitation plainly. Consultation with a forensic anthropologist formalizes skeletal interpretations. Questions addressed include: which fractures are consistent with perimortem force, which are likely post-mortem, whether neck structures show patterns consistent with compression versus suspension, and what, if anything, the overall pattern suggests about mechanism. Where opinions diverge, each expert's method and confidence level are documented. Those differences will later anchor witness examinations at trial. For now, they are logged as competing interpretations, not as settled fact. Throughout, staff confirmed that the case file uses locked identifiers: Westerville, Ohio, as the resident's jurisdiction, recovery off County Line Road, examination at the Montgomery County Coroner's Office, and eventual venue in Delaware County Common Pleas Court. Spelling, dates, and exhibit numbers are checked against intake sheets. Consistency is not cosmetic. It protects admissibility. For viewers who track the human side, this is where procedure also acts as respect. Proper labeling and careful language ensure the record honors the person while serving the investigation. In towns built on routine and trust, unexplained death disrupts both. Clear documentation is how professionals make sense of that disruption. The case leaves this stage with a package of observations, exhibits, and pending tests. No leap to motive, no leap to manner. The file moves to investigators and labs that will compare these findings against scene work, digital timelines, and statements. Intake is complete and the exhibits are sealed. Now processing shifts back to the residence and the nearby woods for meticulous scene and perimeter work. The return to the residence is deliberate. Technicians re-enter with a full kit, body-worn camera time codes sync to the first response pass so nothing is reinterpreted from memory. Doors, strikes, and hinges are photographed at tight angles. Paint transfer, splintering, or tool impressions would be obvious at this distance. None stand out on this pass. Locks are function tested and documented before any additional handling. Windows are checked for pry points, lift marks, or compromised screens. The condo shows the orderliness noted earlier. Essentials present, rooms intact. That observation is factual, not conclusive. It means the threshold assessment doesn't show forced entry. It does not answer how or when Emily left. The garage is treated as a separate zone. Items visible on the initial patrol video are rephotographed in place and then again after measurement. Floor dust patterns are mapped to see whether anything large was moved between the first and second entries. When objects appear repositioned between those two recordings, the project manager flags it as working, a question for later witness examination rather than a finding of intent. Swabs are taken from touch points like the interior driver's door handle, steering wheel, and garage access doorknob. Each swab is packaged, sealed, and logged for DNA screening. Any result here will be preliminary until a profile match or exclusion is reported by the lab. The vehicle itself stays at the scene for initial documentation. VIN confirmed, exterior inspected for fresh scrapes or adhered plant matter, wheel wells checked for debris that might suggest a recent off-pavement path. Odometer and fuel level are recorded with photographs of the instrument cluster. Floor mats are lifted so trace can be collected onto clean paper. If a later lab report returns a distinct soil profile or fiber that aligns with the recovery area, that linkage would be logged as confirmed. At this stage, everything remains working. Outside, a perimeter team walks the short routes from the condo to the wooded strip off County Line Road. They mark the desire lines, paths residents naturally cut through grass and trees, and note camera positions that might catch a walker heading that direction. Doorbell systems, townhome clusters, and a nearby business facade offer limited angles. Owners are approached with consent forms. Video pulls are cataloged by exact time range and device name. A tech creates a camera index, make, model, field of view, retention policy. The most valuable footage often isn't dramatic. It's empty sidewalks at key times. If a camera shows no pedestrian consistent with Emily's stature during a time window when she would have had to pass, that absence becomes negative evidence, reinforcing the device quiet interval established earlier without repeating it. Inside the condo, latent print powder is used selectively on the points likely to retain ridge detail. Door jambs, small boxes, containers in the mudroom. Prints that look usable are lifted and marked for AFIS submission. The expectation is realistic. In a shared residence, many prints will belong to the occupants or frequent visitors. Value here comes from position and sequence more than identity. What was touched, in what order? Personal effects are inventoried with a bias for items that travel with a person. Glasses, watch, medications. Investigators confirm what is routine for Emily and what would be out of character to leave behind. That context is gathered from reliable sources and recorded as testimony, working, until corroborated. In narrative shows, that kind of detail is often stretched. Here it is kept tight. Routine behaviors inform probability, not proof. Neighbor contact continues in a controlled pattern to avoid cross-pollination. One resident's recollection of early morning movement is logged with exact phrasing, not paraphrase. If anyone mentions late-night sounds or a vehicle start, the note stays descriptive, stripped of adjectives, with a time anchor and any corroborating device, an alarm log, a dash cam, a pet cam. Those statements remain working until aligned against independent records. The wooded edge is documented as a perimeter scene rather than a discovery site. Photographs capture trail entries, footing conditions, and any man-made features a pedestrian might use, railings, culverts, benches. If scuff marks, snapped twigs, or snagged fibers are visible, they are collected without over-interpreting. Environmental transfer is common in Ohio woodlots. Investigators avoid turning trace into theory without lab backing. Any botanical material consistent with the recovery area is set aside for comparative review with what was documented at intake. By late afternoon, the team has 3 deliverables: a verified structural record of the condo, a trace and latent package from high-value touchpoints, and a catalog of exterior cameras with retention timelines. None of it answers motive. All of it constrains the timeline. In towns like Westerville, serious investigations earn trust by staying inside the facts. Measured steps, clear logs, and findings labeled for what they are: preliminary, working, or only when the science supports it, confirmed. The human side matters here too. Families want certainty. Labs and logs provide something more reliable than certainty. They provide accountability. The day's notes end with tasking. Submit the latent lifts, rush the DNA screens for the highest value swabs, request additional video from cameras with long retention, and schedule a second exterior walk when light conditions match the suspected movement window. The work is quiet on purpose. Quiet prevents error. With the camera map built and the device window defined, the next step is to align carrier returns and transactions without guessing. Investigators start where modern timelines live, the logs. According to police reports and court filings, Emily's handset shows no outgoing activity after the evening of May 24th. That dark interval, already established, becomes the backbone for everything that follows. Analysts pull call detail records and messaging metadata for both the victim and close contacts. They are looking for routine that suddenly stops, pings that migrate sectors, or late-night bursts that don't fit prior patterns. Nothing material from Emily's phone appears after that evening. It's not a conclusion about cause. It's a clock. The husband's device history is reviewed the same way. Contemporaneous media covering the trial described overnight usage by his handset, extending late into the night and into the early morning. That pattern is logged as a working anchor. It creates times when he is demonstrably awake and interacting with a phone. Sector data is read cautiously. Sector coverage around a home can be broad, and a single phone can hand off between nearby towers without meaningful movement. The point is not to force a path. The point is to note what the network can actually show. Technicians then overlay the camera index from the perimeter canvas built in the prior chapter. Each lens gets a time bracket, from late on May 24th into the morning of May 25th. Does any angle capture a pedestrian who fits Emily's stature moving from the condo toward the wooded strip off County Line Road? In several windows, there is nothing. Empty sidewalks, light traffic, sprinklers coming on. Absence can be a data point when a person would likely have crossed a lens to reach a location. Those gaps are labeled as negative evidence and matched to precise timestamps so they can be compared later with testimony. Financials are pulled next. The birthday evening had routine purchases, dining, and everyday charges that appear in open reporting. After the evening of May 24th, no new card transactions or ATM withdrawals tied to Emily are documented in the public record. Banks confirm what investigators often rely on in missing person work. Sustained silence in spending aligns with the communications gap. It doesn't prove harm, but it pushes the estimate of last known activity toward a narrower window. Where possible, receipts are requested from businesses to fix minute level times and camera frames that may already have been overwritten elsewhere. Location services from apps are not asserted without a record. For this era, the safer ground is carrier logs, handset behavior, and cameras. Analysts check Wi-Fi associations from the condo router and any known networks that Emily's devices commonly joined. If there is no post-evening association, that data is simply added to the timeline. The handset did not rejoin familiar networks later that night. That note is preliminary until compared with router uptime and ISP logs to rule out service interruptions. Email and social media check-ins are treated the same way: timestamps, last logins, and any overnight password resets. Nothing meaningful appears in open sources to contradict the device dark interval already on the board. Investigators record that silence and move to calls or messages received by Emily's number. If someone tried to reach her, the unanswered rings are just as useful. They show when others noticed a gap and began leaving a trace the investigation can read. Vehicle movement is examined through indirect tools. The car parked at the residence narrows the transport question. Automatic license plate readers on nearby arterials are queried for that plate around the critical hours. Where no hit is returned, the report marks that absence is negative evidence and moves on. Private lots with cameras near the trailheads are requested again in case retention windows were extended. Most of the time, the strongest tool is simple: confirming that routine transactions and digital check-ins, the mundane clicks of a life, stop together. One practical concern in any digital build is false precision. The data sometimes aligns too cleanly, as though the story were engineered to match a theory. That is a signal to slow down, not speed up. Analysts document confidence levels beside each entry: high for authenticated carrier timestamps, medium for camera windows with partial views, low for any inference that leans on behavior. This is how you keep a crime timeline honest. You label certainty and uncertainty the same way. When the rows are complete, the result is a tight band. Last known personal contact on May 24th in the evening. No outgoing activity from Emily's accounts or cards after that. The car left at home, and across several angles, no pedestrian matching her profile moving toward the woods in the hours when she would have had to pass. The husband's overnight handset activity is logged as a working comparator, to be discussed in the interviews phase rather than argued on the page. The human point is brief but necessary. Digital trails represent people, not just devices. If the trail ends, the work has to become more exact, not more dramatic. That's how communities like Westerville keep trust, when answers are still pending. Clear limits, clear logs, and no leaps. Next, those logs meet words, statements from the husband, neighbors, and anyone who saw Emily on the birthday evening, tested line by line against what the network and receipts will allow. With the digital grid in place, the work shifts to words that can be tested against clocks. Detectives begin with the husband's initial account, recorded on body-worn camera and memorialized in reports. He says he woke to find Emily Noble gone, essentials still at the condo, no obvious sign of disturbance. That narrative is set beside the handset timelines and camera windows built earlier. According to police records and contemporaneous media, no outgoing activity from Emily's phone appears after the evening of May 24th, while the husband's handset shows overnight interaction. The comparison isn't a verdict, it's a worksheet. Each statement is broken into verifiable units: time of waking, last in-person sighting, when he noticed her missing, and each unit is checked against a time-stamped artifact. Where a claim fits the records, it is noted as consistent. Where the records are silent, it remains working. Where the records conflict, it is flagged for follow-up. Neighbors are interviewed separately to avoid cross-influence. Some recall ordinary outdoor noise, one references early morning movement, another hedges on the hour. Investigators keep the phrasing exactly as given and avoid paraphrase. When a neighbor's memory suggests a time that would have intersected a specific camera lens, detectives mark the clip for review. And if the lens shows no pedestrian at that minute range, the absence is logged as negative evidence tied to that single claim only. Reliability is built by limits. A recollection is not discarded, but it is bracketed by what the devices can or cannot show. A short, recorded check confirms voluntariness and Miranda where required, then returns to specifics that can be measured. Did anyone text Emily after the birthday evening? If yes, what minute? Did a doorbell alert trigger at an hour that seems important? Investigators pull the raw log rather than rely on screenshots, because server time and phone time can drift. This is the tone throughout: clinical, cautious, and repeatable in court. Content from the husband's early media outreach, like podcast participation or public searches, is cataloged without judgment. Statements made in those forums are treated the same way as an interview, transcribed, time-stamped, and tested where possible. If he describes a route Emily would have taken, detectives map that path against the camera index created in the perimeter chapter. If he recalls a precise bedtime or wake time, that segment is compared to handset activity on his device. If the device is quiet when he says he was awake and using it, the note reads inconclusive rather than adversarial. Precision is earned, not implied. Investigators also seek routine context from people who knew Emily well. What she typically carried on walks, whether she used alarms, how often she locked the interior garage door. These are testimony working until a pattern is corroborated by more than one independent source or supported by digital residue, e.g., recurring routes visible in previously saved fitness data, if any is lawfully obtained and still available. The goal is not to manufacture character. It is to determine whether the crime timeline matches a plausible departure scenario or suggests an interruption. By the close of this phase, the board shows 3 buckets: statements that match artifacts, statements that the record cannot confirm, and statements that meet conflict markers. None by themselves answer manner or motive. They do, however, sharpen the next tasks. Re-interview limited witnesses with targeted time ranges, pursue any additional private video tied to a disputed minute, and prepare a clean synopsis suitable for prosecutors who must decide whether the totality justifies charges. The work moves next to procurement and planning, receipts, reservations, and tool sourcing. reviewed strictly through timestamps that either align with the established window or fall outside it. With statements mapped to clocks, the next move is to test intent by timestamp, receipts, surveillance, and any tool sourcing that could intersect the narrow window after the evening of May 24th. Detectives pull bank and card activity for Emily Noble and Matt Moore, bracketing the birthday evening through the morning of May 25th. According to police reports and contemporaneous media, Emily shows no purchases after the evening of May 24th, aligning with the established digital silence. Investigators review Moore's statements for restaurants, fuel, hardware, and online orders. Any line that might relate to cordage, fasteners, or atypical supplies is flagged working and cross-checked against store video when available. Where a receipt is ordinary, a grocery run, a pharmacy charge, it stays ordinary. Where there is no receipt for a specific item alleged at trial, that absence is noted plainly and not turned into speculation. Businesses tied to the couple's routine are approached with lawful requests for transaction logs and camera pulls. Managers identify order numbers, tender types, and minute-level timestamps that can be lined up with exterior cameras already indexed in the perimeter canvas. If a purchase time places Moore at a counter while his phone shows activity, the entry becomes a confirmed time-place marker for his movements, even if it does not explain Emily's. If a receipt suggests a store whose cameras overwrite quickly, detectives still record the attempt. The inability to retrieve video is documented as a limitation, not as proof of anything else. Tool sourcing is approached conservatively. The USB cord documented at morgue intake is evaluated for brand or retailer signatures, including molding seams, length, and connector type. Where manufacturers maintain lot data, analysts may request ranges for distribution, but without a unique serial, a direct purchase match is unlikely. If the prosecution theory later argues staging, procurement evidence must do more than feel consistent. It needs a clock and a camera. In open reporting, no single receipt has been publicly shown to tie Moore to the specific cord recovered. That point is kept working unless linked by admissible exhibit. Medical, travel, and logistics checks stay inside accessible records. Hospitals and urgent care centers near Westerville, Ohio are queried for admissions under Emily's identifiers within hours of the missing report. No admission consistent with her profile is recorded in the public domain. Airlines and nearby bus services return no bookings for Emily in the same window. Any hits for Moore are reviewed the way all hits are, by exact date, time, and whether the travel actually occurred. Where nothing appears, the entry reads negative evidence with the specific time bracket. It is not converted into motive. Detectives also examine subscription deliveries and smart home shipments that can create unnoticed trails, doorbell packages, curbside pickups, buy online pickup in store. If a curbside order lists Moore's name and a tight pickup time, that minute can be compared against the camera index on the approach route. If the route's lenses show no car, the explanation could be simple: a different vehicle, a narrow angle, or a camera gap. The log records those options without ranking them. Planning evidence, if it exists, often leaves patterns rather than a single incriminating slip. That is why each receipt is treated as a puzzle piece only when a timestamp, a camera, and a physical exhibit fit together. Anything less remains preliminary or working and is carried forward for prosecutors to weigh later. In communities where crime investigations test trust, restraint is not caution, it's procedure. The next step takes these procurement findings and hands them to charging authorities, where theories, staged or otherwise, must be translated into warrants, filings, and the rules that govern what a jury may hear. With receipts, cameras, and statements mapped, detectives package the record for prosecutors: what is known, what is absent, and what can be shown to a jury without guesswork. The submission reads like a ledger. According to police reports and contemporaneous media, the state's theory forms around 3 pillars labeled for the prosecutor's review. First, the timeline. Within minutes of the May 25th missing person call, officers found Emily's essentials at home. Later that night, preceding the report, her phone shows no outgoing activity. Second, the recovery and intake. A USB cord documented at the neck, head-neck findings recorded as working contested until lab and expert review. Third, the perimeter. Camera windows that do not show a pedestrian matching Emily on probable routes in the hours when she would have had to pass. Each pillar is paired with limitations, so the affidavits do not overstate. Interagency roles are formalized. Westerville police lead the fieldwork and scene management. Ohio BCI handles DNA trace, latent comparisons, and digital extractions. Montgomery County Coroner's Office documents the remains and coordinates with a forensic anthropologist. Delaware County Prosecutor evaluates charging. Search warrants cover the residence, vehicles, relevant devices, and carrier records. Each warrant affidavit cites a specific item and a reason to believe it will establish or refute an element, timing, planning, or mechanism. When a device is locked or cloud data sits behind a provider, investigators use standard legal process rather than shortcuts. No Interpol, no extradition. This is a local Ohio homicide inquiry that must meet Ohio evidentiary rules. Prosecutors then pressure test sufficiency. Can probable cause be articulated without importing opinion? The state argues that the physical exhibited intake combined with the digital silence and camera gaps supports a homicide theory that Emily's death was not self-inflicted and that the scene could have been staged. The defense position, captured in court filings and media, rejects that read. It frames the same record as consistent with self-harm or an undetermined event and emphasizes the absence of direct purchase links or conclusive lab ties to the cord. Both sides are looking at the same entries. The question is whether the state has enough to file. The charging decision arrives in June 2021 with an arrest and indictment for 2 counts of murder and 1 count of felonious assault. The affidavits reference the timeline anchors, morgue observations, and expert interpretations that favor compression inconsistent with suicide. Lab reports are attached where available. Where results are pending or contested, the attachments are labeled accordingly. Nothing is added that the state cannot authenticate. From here, the machinery shifts. Case agents coordinate with BCI to prioritize remaining analyses for disclosure. The coroner confirms what language the office will stand behind. Digital analysts finalize exhibits that show what the network can prove, not what it cannot. Discovery begins to flow under Ohio rules, the same packets that will later be argued in open court. Charging theory has done its job. It transformed logs, scenes, and interviews into counts that a judge can read and a jury can be instructed on. The handoff now moves to admissibility. What survives motions will be the story jurors actually hear. The proceedings moved from detectives' case files into the courtroom, where every argument hinged on what evidence could properly reach a jury. Early hearings focused on admissibility. The defense challenged whether jurors should see photographs of the cord recovered around Emily Noble's neck, summaries of phone records, and selected autopsy findings. The judge ruled that exhibits directly tied to forensic methods and documented chain of custody would be allowed, but speculation or ungrounded conclusions would be excluded. Bond for Matthew Moore had been set at $2.5 million more than a year earlier, signaling the court's view of the allegations while maintaining due process. At trial, prosecutors argued that Emily's death was a homicide staged to resemble suicide. They presented the USB cord, the tree branch where the body was suspended, and injury patterns they claimed were inconsistent with self-suspension. Jurors viewed photographs of the cord and heard testimony from medical experts who pointed to head and neck fractures as supporting their theory of staging. The defense countered with 2 primary arguments. Decomposition limited the certainty of forensic conclusions, and the suspension mechanism itself was plausible without another person's involvement. To reinforce this, they called Dr. John Bolte, a biomechanical engineer, who conducted tests using weighted surrogates and a cord on a similar branch. His demonstrations showed that the branch could hold and the cord behaved in a way consistent with suspension, supporting the defense claim of plausibility. The judge admitted this testimony after reviewing its methodology, instructing jurors to weigh it alongside the medical evidence. Tensions rose when the defense sought dismissal mid-trial. The judge denied the motion, emphasizing that the jury must hear the full body of admissible evidence. This highlighted how much of the case rested on interpretation rather than direct proof. Digital records were entered, but gaps in device activity and phone logs could not, by themselves, pinpoint a time of death or prove foul play. Prosecutors argued those absences were meaningful, showing silence where there should have been routine contact. The defense stressed the limits of negative evidence, reminding jurors that absence does not equal proof. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned its decision on August 26, 2022. They acquitted Matthew Moore of all charges, concluding that prosecutors had not met the burden of proof. With that, the court acknowledged Emily Noble's death remained a crime without a clear resolution. Remains recovered. Cause of death, undetermined. The trial closed without definitive answers, leaving a space for reflection. For those following the case, it underscored how fragile truth can be when filtered through the rules of evidence. Families, communities, and viewers alike are reminded that in true crime, resolution in court does not always equal resolution in life. Looking back on Emily Noble's story, I can't help but reflect on how fragile truth and justice can feel in our system. Following every log, every record, every testimony taught me that life can change in a single evening, and yet the answers we seek may never be complete. What I take away, and what I hope you carry with you, is the reminder to protect those close to you, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to stay present in the lives of people who may be quietly struggling. Now, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think this case says about how we handle justice in America? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next true crime investigation we bring forward.